to Off the Shelf. I'm your host, Yvonne Wolf, and today our special guest is David Castlewitz. He is the author of Cat Rider and Triptych. Nice to meet you.
Oh, thank you for having me. Nice to meet you.
So, David, you've been a science fiction writer for
Many
years.
When I was little, I used to write stories about giant paramecium and intelligent ants, and I just loved science fiction.
And battling them,
and
right? Or writing them.
And not writing them, but fighting them and being inspired by all the TV shows and movies that I saw. And like one of my favorites was Them.
Yes.
And I used to write my own little comic books. Although I couldn't draw, so everything was a stick figure. But
yes. Oh, that's all right.
My forte was the narrative and the dialogue. And that's what I was really interested in, was writing science fiction. And then, over the years, I wrote other things as well. I wrote a couple plays that were produced early on, and some other stories that were published. And never really made it to the big time where I could make a living at it, so I always had to have a job, which annoyed me to no end.
But then you were in the technology field.
Yes,
and
I was
also
in the technology field, and so I wrote a lot of articles about technology. I worked as doing freelance with a small Chicago-based computer magazine called Computer People Monthly, and I wrote a monthly column about technology, usually the history, like the invention of the punch card and the invention of the slide rule and things of that nature. And so I did a lot of delving into the historical nature of various things and really found I had a love for history.
So the technology and the machinery
how
itself,
things were built,
right?
the people who came up with the ideas and their challenges. For example, there's a gentleman in Iowa who created a computer. His name was Atanisov, and he created a computer that was essentially a bunch of relays. So it was not really digital, it was more mechanical. Then there was the ENIAC in 1946-47, which was really the world's first digital computer. It was based on tubes. And so it was rooms and rooms and rooms of vacuum tubes all over the place. Wow. And very hot environment to work in. And then, of course, there are a lot of secret endeavors going on in Great Britain for the war effort during World War II,
right.
Computers that they were building. And so I wrote articles about that. Wrote an article about Alan Turing,
yes,
who's a very famous computer
now
scientist.
Became more famous.
Yes, he became very, very famous.
Within the last 10 years.
And yes, more so in the last 10 years than ever. And he came up with this idea for a general purpose computer to help solve the Enigma problem. The Enigma was a World War II invention of the German army for encrypting secret messages.
So let's talk about your two recent books, Cat Rider and
Cat Rider and Triptych.
Yes, and Triptych is based in Chicago.
Triptych is based in a Chicago of the future, where if you want to live in Chicago, protected by the security apparatus and the walls and the fences, you got to have a job. You lose your job and you lose your permit. And essentially, if you lose your job, you got about 6 weeks to find a new one. And there aren't very many jobs because most of the jobs are handled by the robots.
Yes.
So if you lose your job, you get thrown out of the city, and then you have to scrounge somewhere along the lakefront, and there's a whole separate environment, an entirely separate economy that exists outside of what's referred to as Chicago proper. It was a fun story to write in that it started off as a short story and then became another short story with a different set of characters, and then a third set of characters and a third story, all involving the same environment from different perspectives. So there's a ne'er-do-well slacker who can't quite figure out where his place is in society, can't hold down a job. There's a security officer who essentially is corrupt, makes extra money by smuggling people and supplies in and out of the city. And then a third character who is part of the apparatus, who really doesn't know what his job is either, and he's just trying to survive any way he can until he gets in with the wrong crowd. And they all wind up living outside Chicago's walls, trying to make it in a more austere environment. And it was a fun book to write. It took me about a year because I kept writing sections and then stopping for a couple months to write short stories.
Yes, and then from your inspiration of them, is that where Cat Rider came from?
Cat Rider came actually first because Cat Rider also started out as a short story. And my main character just kept getting into trouble, and so the story just kept growing. And it is essentially what's referred to as steampunk. It's set in a Victorian period of time in which there are people who are about 2.5 to 3 inches tall. According to their mythology, they're the byproduct of a 18th century alchemist. They live in this environment that is helpful for them in that there are grooves in the street so they can walk safely. There's a tube that runs high up so they can travel in little cars. They have their own society, and they live juxtaposed to real people like us who are referred to as biggies. The main characters, her goal in life was to be a cat rider. She wanted cats. People ride cats. These mini folk, ride cats, battling the rat infestation in the city. And she always wanted to be a cat rider. Her family are circus performers. Well-to-do people often have mini folk that they house in dollhouses who provide entertainment of one sort or another.
I see.
But Karen wanted to be a cat rider and ride cats, ideally for a well-known company. She wanted to be in the elite. And when she finally gets her chance, she finds out it's not as ideal as she thought.
So it's not just being like a rodeo rider, to be something adventurous.
You ride on these cats and you have a lance and you charge against the rats and kill them.
It's
and
a
they're hired
matador type of
job.
Yes,
and the companies are hired by the city to go in and break up infestations of rats in the city.
Yeah. Well, that sounds very practical function.
It was. I thought
so.
So. It gave somebody something interesting to do.
Well, you mentioned both of your books that short story is where you started with.
Exactly.
So let's talk about, and you're a very prolific short story writer.
I do write a lot. I write every day. Sometimes I only write a paragraph, which might get thrown away because I don't like it. And other days I'll write 4, 5, 6, 10 pages of a story. Some stories I'll finish and not like and put away. Others I'll finish, edit, and send off to a print or an online magazine. Sometimes I get acceptances. Excuse me. Sometimes I get an acceptance one after the other, and it's very heartwarming. And other times I get rejections one after the other.
And
so the key is you just got to be persistent.
And keep going.
Yeah, keep going. And not if you get rejected, you get rejected, and you just keep on going. And I had one story I sent out to 20-some different magazines until finally a magazine that was publishing fantasy in what they referred to as a pulp magazine style liked the story and published it.
And so it took that many tries.
It took that many tries. I had the story going out for about 5 years. So
but you liked the story. You just didn't want to give up on it.
I believed in the story. There are stories that I really, really believe in, and I'll send out over and over and over again. The other thing, too, with some stories, when they get rejected, there'll be little comments, and I'll incorporate those comments into the edits.
So it's not the same story.
I'll take the same story,
and
maybe I'll shorten it a little.
Yes.
I'll change the ending to make it more snappy, change the beginning to make it more interesting, and send it out again. The thing with the short stories, you got to really grab the reader right away.
Right.
So there isn't any time to set a mood or an atmosphere or a setting. You have to get right in there, and in the first paragraph, preferably in the very first line, grab the reader's attention. So
sometimes sometimes I find short stories end too abruptly because
I've been criticized about that.
Right? They have to. Is there a word limit on your short stories?
There are some stories that I write particularly for what is referred to as flash fiction. It used to be called short stories. They're 1,000 words or less.
I see.
And there are a lot of, there's a good handful of venues for that. And I like writing those stories because they're enjoyable. I don't get paid for those stories. Those are a non-paying market for the most part. But when I write a story and it's published, they mention my website, and I'll see an uptick in traffic
I see.
and an occasional sale of one of my books.
So that's the trade-off. So
That's
you
the
have
trade-off.
a website. You have a website.
I have a
that you-
website called davidsjournal and .com, and it's somewhat eclectic. I talk about science fiction. I talk about what study that I engaged in the 90s called artificial life. I talk a lot about my writing about World War I.
Yes.
And some reprints of articles from there. If you Google my name, you'll come across some of my old articles, either about World War I or post-World War II frictions that occurred, things of that nature.
So these two books, Cat Rider and
Triptych.
Triptych, are printed copies.
They're printed, they're in hardback.
And you have a third
I have
book.
a third called Jenny R., which is somewhat whimsical, about a robot who tries to masquerade as a person
Okay.
and live in Chicago. Sit down
undercover.
over near
Passing, right? Passing as a
passing
human,
as
right?
as a human,
Uh-huh.
as an experiment with one of her inventors, the main programmer, who is a young woman
Okay.
who a little bit ditzy, but she was a very intelligent programmer trying to protect her creation. The book is only in a Kindle version, so
Yes.
you need to read it with a Kindle or with the Kindle software that Amazon provides if you want to read it like on the phone or on a computer, or even I think you can also get a version that runs on an iPad.
So tell us about that. How? So you market it on Amazon,
Yeah,
just
on
like
Amazon,
a
just
book,
as a.
but yeah, but
It's
being
just
on
an
a Kindle
electronic
version.
format. That's all. No, there's no hard copy.
So does that push the page a little easier to find, or does it?
Well, you'll find it if you do a search. It's also, referenced from my website. A lot of times, I will do a promotion where I'll give away the Kindle version of Jenny R. for 3 days, 4 days, 5 days is the limit, in the hopes that people will read that and then want to buy Cat Rider or Triptych.
Yeah, I see. Yeah.
So sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
So the characters are all different in all three of your books, or are there any
All my
overlap?
books are different characters.
Okay.
I have a friend who tells me I should write books in sequence with the same characters and create a brand. And I say to her, well, that works for you. It doesn't work for me. I just like writing books about different people, different situations.
Yes.
And every situation is, interesting. It's fun. It's sometimes a challenge. The challenge with Triptych was to make all the characters different enough that they didn't, merge into one. So everybody is different. Everybody has a different place in their society, even though they all come together at the end in one final episode.
So David, we met through Marie
Davidson, she and I are in a writing group together.
Yes, and you pitch ideas to each other?
Yes, we do. We'll meet about once a month from home to home, and we'll read portions of a story or sometimes
Aloud? You
aloud.
read your book aloud,
Everybody
right?
gets
So-
a copy, distribute a copy, and you read a portion of a story, or if I write something short, a short story, or what's referred to as flash fiction, it's short enough that I read the whole thing. It only
Yes.
takes a couple. So they're usually like 2 or 3 pages at the most, and read those and get comments. And I remember when I was working on Cat Rider, I read a portion of it, and I got some really, I wouldn't say nasty comments. I got some comments that were very, very helpful.
Okay,
and
yes.
it really helped me.
Sometimes
cement
it
the
hurts, right?
I didn't like the comments, but they really helped me cement the character. And made her, this young woman, Karen, a much stronger character.
So this community of writing is very importance in your development
Absolutely.
as a writer and
Absolutely.
for the professional.
It's helped me become a better writer. It's helped me enjoy that sort of community, and it's been very vital to my progress as a writer.
And your group is local? And
Yeah,
that you
local.
can-
We have members in Evanston, Glenview, Wilmette.
Yes.
We had a couple members in Wilmette. We lost one who moved away. And it's a tight little group. And like I said, we meet, about once a month. And best part is all the socializing.
Yes.
We
writing
eat,
can
we
be-
drink, and we talk.
Because writing sometimes can be very lonely. You're by
It
yourself
can. You
writing.
spend all that time all by yourself. I remember I was working on one something I was writing. This is back in the '90s, and my wife used to complain because I'd go down in the basement where I had my little office, and I would just disappear for hours and hours and hours writing.
Yes.
I used to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, so I'd get a couple hours worth of writing in before going to work.
Yes. Oh,
And
that's
that was
a dedicated
rewarding but
writer.
tiring. So
Yes.
I would do that for like 3 or 4 months. And
But sometimes you feel you got more out of the day than a day
if you
sitting
got
at the
started
office,
early,
right?
that's right. If I got started early, luckily I had a dog. He'd wake me up early. He wanted to go out, so I'd get up and let him out, and then he would go down with me and sit by me while I was writing.
Yes.
He'd go back to sleep. So.
Yes. You have a technology background?
Yes,
How
I
does
do.
the writing affect your work the other way, right?
Well,
You
for
said-
one thing, being a writer, I was able to do very well in writing responses to requests for that people would make for projects to be developed, things of that nature, and also I could write really good memos. So that really helped. The technology aspects that I've come across day by day would influence things that I would write, particularly in a field called genetic algorithms,
Oh.
which is a sort of a
Nice.
minor field having to do with artificial life.
Oh, yes.
You hear about viruses and worms and those sorts of nasties that proliferate across the internet. They're a form of, sometimes are considered a form of artificial life. So I was studying that, why I don't know, but I was studying that for work, and it influenced some stories that I wanted to work on. And
artificial life. as
artificial
in
life. Essentially what you're creating
Artificial organs? I mean, or what?
they're silicon-based organisms
Okay.
that aren't really alive but act like they're alive. And the technique is used to solve technical problems in a non-heuristic manner. So instead of hammering at the problem and looking for a solution by trying to do, well, if this is that, then do step A. That's that, do step B. That sort of heuristic approach.
Okay.
With a genetic algorithm, you're creating hundreds upon thousands of little programs that are trying to come up with the solution by guesswork
Wow.
and doing a match against a performance test to see how close they are to finding a solution. And these days that's used a lot with a field of study called neural networks. And neural networks are like the backbone of artificial intelligence.
Yes, it's almost like it's
So-
thinking on its own.
Yes, exactly.
Yes.
Exactly what it's for, thinking on its own. And I was interested in that field. I didn't work in it professionally, but I dabbled in it for fun. So I highlight some of that on my website, and I used a lot of it in stories that I wrote. Like I wrote a story about a guy who was basically infatuated with a TV character only to find out that she wasn't real, she was a cartoon.
Oh.
But he was still infatuated with her.
Yeah.
I did other stories about similar problems of TV producers working with artificial life forms that were doing television shows, things like that.
Yes.
So
Well,
it's fun.
Yeah. Well, let's talk a little bit about your influences.
Well, yeah, Twilight Zone from the late 50s and early 60s, that was a big influence in my life.
Yes.
I used to, devour that. I grew up in a household where there was only one TV set. Nobody ever had two TVs.
Right.
So, but I was lucky enough to be able to get to watch Twilight Zone.
So your family didn't share your your interest?
My mother was a reader, but not of science fiction.
Okay.
And I lived with my grandparents, and they weren't much interested in those things.
So
They
when you
just-
get a turn with the TV,
I
that
got to
was your
turn on
show.
the TV, so I got to watch Twilight Zone once a week.
The Twilight Zone has some incredible thematic
Absolutely.
scientific problems that still now science fiction problems that we still see in current shows. And
That's true. There's that one that they did where it's called Third Planet from the Sun, and this couple are trying to escape a war-torn environment,
Yes.
and you think they're trying to escape from Earth, only to find out they're trying to escape from somewhere else to go to Earth.
yes,
There's
or about health, about this old couple. They both have health ailments, and then they only could afford one of them getting a regenerative
body.
new body.
Yes.
And I feel that is so still true right now. We hear about all these incredible cures, but they're very expensive. And what would you do?
Exactly. So there's a lot of themes from Twilight Zone, as well as themes from the 1950s and early 60s that are repeated here in the 21st century in other stories.
Yeah.
So there's also Star Trek was something that influenced me to a certain degree.
Yeah.
I came to Star Trek late, but it was on syndication when I lived in Philadelphia. That's where I'm from, is Philadelphia, and it was on syndication, and so every night I got to watch it. And I watched it over. I watched the same episodes over. I can still watch episodes over and over again. I just fell in love with that show. And at one time, I used to contribute to one of these fanzines that was one of these mimeographed magazines with stories about Star Trek episodes. So that was always a lot of fun.
The book cover. Were you able to find someone to help you with that, or did
Actually,
you?
yes, I did. I did some searching on the internet, and I found a young woman who lives in Indiana who would do a book cover according to the specifications needed for a Kindle-type book,
Oh, okay.
and at a very reasonable price. We basically contracted over the internet. She did a cover. I approved or made suggestions about changes that I wanted, and then voila, I had a cover.
Yes.
And she would send it to me with a, copyright notice and a, usage sheet, which what I could use it for and
Yes.
things like that. And I just took it from there. So, and I can use the cover for just about anything. I could do T-shirts if I wanted to. I think.
And websites
And website. I have a version on my website. So if you go to my website, it'll scroll through. So as the cover changes, the little blurb about the book will change. And I also did one time. I printed in black and white, not color, on business cards I took with me to a convention that I went to.
book show. So now, even with the writing group, did you still had to use an editor to?
Well, I do most of the editing myself. There are times, in fact, it happened recently, where I wasn't sure about a book, and my wife is a voracious reader, and she went through it and she did some editing for me. She told me where it was weak and where it needed to be beefed up, and so I made the changes that she suggested. She read triptych from cover to cover. She liked that a lot. She read manuscript form. And made suggestions about changes and things of that nature, and also typos. And a lot of times it's hard to find a typo. You have a word that is spelled
very hard.
It's spelled differently, means different things, and the spell checker isn't going to catch it. So it's nice to have another person, because I tell you, as many times as I'll read a page, there's still things I miss, and I try to read as carefully as possible.
Of course, and then that's where your writers group might be.
The writers group is very helpful. We were doing meeting the other day, and someone, I think it was Marie, actually pointed out that I used the word loss, L-O-S-T, when I meant to use loss, L-O-S-S.
Oh,
Which is
yes.
not the type of thing I would have noticed.
Right, right.
And that was
Very
one of
good
my
point.
flash fiction stories. I should remark that one of my influences is a science fiction writer from the 40s and 50s named Frederick Brown. He wrote a lot of mysteries, but also a lot of science fiction. And he wrote science fiction in that short story format. Very snappy, stories that would have a twisted ending or something.
Well, thank
So-
you very much, David, for sharing those stories with us.
Oh, you're welcome.
And thank you for watching. Join us next time on Off the Shelf.